The dust-choked evening air of Silver Creek hung thick with memories as Samuel Hayes pushed open the weathered doors of the Grand Union Hotel's ballroom, the sound of a lively fiddle reaching his ears for the first time in nearly 2 years. It was the summer of 1878, and the small Wyoming town was celebrating its 10th anniversary with what the locals were calling the social event of the decade. Samuel hadn't planned on attending. In fact, he'd sworn off such gatherings after that terrible night when typhoid had taken his young wife, Elizabeth. But Mayor Thornton had practically dragged him here, insisting that 2 years of isolation on his ranch was long enough for any man to grieve. Samuel adjusted his bolo tie, feeling like a stranger in his own formal wear. The black suit coat felt restrictive after years of nothing but work shirts and denim. At 32, he was still young by most measures, but the lines around his eyes and the flecks of gray in his sandy hair told a different story. Loss had aged him prematurely. "Samuel Hayes, as I live and breathe," called Henry Wilson, the town's banker. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." Samuel nodded curtly. "Just paying my respects to the town, Henry. Don't expect me to stay long." "Nonsense," Henry replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Mary's been asking about you. Says the children miss seeing you in town." Samuel's jaw tightened. He missed the Wilson children too. He and Elizabeth had been godparents to their eldest. Another reminder of what he'd lost. "I'll be sure to say hello before I leave," he said, moving deeper into the crowded room. The ballroom was transformed from its usual state. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floor. Ladies in colorful dresses twirled in the arms of gentlemen in their finest, while those not dancing clustered around tables laden with food and punch. Samuel made his way to the far corner, nodding politely to familiar faces but avoiding conversation. He found a vacant chair against the wall, where he could observe without participating. From this vantage point, he watched Sheriff Miller attempting to dance with his rotund wife, the couple laughing as they stumbled through the steps. Nearby, the Thompson twins argued over which of them would ask the blacksmith's daughter for the next dance. The scenes of everyday happiness felt like they belonged to another world, one Samuel no longer inhabited. That's when he first noticed her. She stood on the opposite side of the room, a woman he'd never seen before. She wore a modest emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair, which was pinned up in an elegant style that framed her face. Unlike the other women who clustered in chattering groups, she stood slightly apart, observing the festivities with an expression that Samuel found oddly familiar, the look of someone who was present but not truly participating. "That's Grace Harrington," came a voice beside him. Samuel turned to find Doc Peterson settling into the adjacent chair, following his gaze. "Arrived on yesterday's stage from Boston. Schoolteacher, I hear. Mayor hired her special to replace old Mrs. Winters." Samuel nodded absently, still watching the newcomer. "Boston's a long way from Silver Creek." "Indeed it is," Doc agreed. "Word is she's running from something, though nobody knows what. Town gossips are having a field day with speculation." Samuel frowned. "People should mind their own business," says the man who's been staring at her for the past 5 minutes. Doc chuckled, then grew serious. "It's good to see you here, Sam. Elizabeth wouldn't have wanted—" "Don't." Samuel cut him off sharply. "Just don't." Doc sighed and patted Samuel's knee before rising to his feet. "Well, I promised the missus a dance. You should try it yourself sometime. Doesn't hurt nearly as much as brooding." As Doc walked away, Samuel returned his attention to Miss Harrington. She was now speaking with Mayor Thornton's wife, smiling politely as the older woman gestured animatedly. There was something in her posture, a certain tension that suggested she was merely enduring the conversation rather than enjoying it. The band struck up a new tune, and couples flooded the dance floor. Samuel watched as several men approached Miss Harrington, but she declined each invitation with a polite shake of her head. Eventually, she slipped away from Mrs. Thornton and made her way to the refreshment table, where she poured herself a cup of punch. Samuel found himself on his feet before he'd made a conscious decision to move. He approached the table, standing a respectful distance away as he poured his own drink. "Not much of a dancer either?" he asked, surprising himself with the initiative. Grace Harrington looked up, startled by the sudden conversation. Her eyes were a clear hazel that caught the lantern light. "I beg your pardon? I noticed you turning down offers to dance," Samuel explained, immediately regretting his forwardness. "Forgive me, Mississippi. I didn't mean to pry." To his surprise, she smiled a small, genuine expression that transformed her face. "And here I thought I was being discreet. No, Mr. Hayes. Samuel Hayes. Mr. Hayes. I enjoy dancing well enough, but tonight I'm content to observe. New towns have their own rhythms, and I'm still finding my footing. Silver Creek's rhythm is simple enough. Work hard, mind your business, and watch out for rattlesnakes, both the reptilian and human varieties." She laughed, a warm sound that caught Samuel off guard. "Solid advice for any frontier town. I'll keep it in mind." "You're the new schoolteacher," he said. "And you've been asking about me?" There was no accusation in her tone, merely curiosity. "Small towns don't keep secrets well. I heard from Doc Peterson just now." "Ah," she nodded. "And what else did the good doctor share about me?" "Only that you're from Boston and arrived yesterday. The rest, I imagine, is your business." Grace studied him for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "I appreciate that sentiment, Mr. Hayes. Few others in town seem to share it. Most folks here mean well." Samuel found himself defending his neighbors. "They're just curious about newcomers. It'll pass once the next bit of excitement comes along." "And how often does excitement come to Silver Creek?" "Often enough to keep life interesting. Not so often that we get complacent." Samuel surprised himself with how easily the conversation flowed. It had been months since he'd spoken this much to anyone. As they talked, the band shifted to a slower melody, a wistful waltz that immediately transported Samuel back to his wedding day. Elizabeth in white, laughing as he twirled her across a similar floor, their future stretching bright and limitless before them. His expression must have changed, because Grace's smile faded. "Mr. Hayes, are you unwell?" "Excuse me," he muttered, setting down his cup and turning abruptly away. He pushed through the crowd toward the double doors that led to the hotel's veranda, desperate for fresh air. The cool night breeze helped clear his head as he gripped the wooden railing, forcing himself to take deep breaths. "Mr. Hayes." He turned to find Grace Harrington standing in the doorway, concern evident on her face. "Miss Harrington, I apologize for my rudeness," he said stiffly. "No apology necessary," she replied, stepping onto the veranda but maintaining a respectful distance. "I only wanted to ensure you were all right." "I'm fine," he answered automatically, then sighed. "That's not entirely true. The music, it brought back memories." She nodded, moving to stand beside him at the railing. "Music has that power, for better or worse." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the main street of Silver Creek. Despite the late hour, several establishments remained illuminated: the saloon, the sheriff's office, and the telegraph station where the operator was known to work through the night when messages were expected from the east. "I lost my wife," Samuel said suddenly, surprising himself. 2 years ago. Typhoid." Grace's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Hayes." "We used to dance," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "Elizabeth loved it. Said it was like flying with your feet still on the ground." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. Samuel looked back toward the ballroom, where shadows of dancing couples were visible through the windows. Haven't danced since. Can't bring myself to. Grace was quiet for a long moment. I understand, she finally said. More than you might think. There was a weight to her words that made Samuel look at her more closely. The sadness in her eyes wasn't mere sympathy, it was recognition. Boston? He asked quietly. She nodded. I was engaged. Charles was a doctor. When the influenza outbreak hit last year, he worked himself to exhaustion caring for patients. He became ill himself and... She trailed off, looking down at her hands. Afterward, I couldn't stay. Every street, every building held memories. So you came as far west as you could. As far as was practical for a woman alone, she agreed. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Wyoming Territory, it seemed like Providence. Samuel understood completely. How many times had he considered selling his ranch and moving on? Only the thought of leaving the land he and Elizabeth had loved kept him rooted in Silver Creek. Does it help? He asked. The distance. Grace considered the question. Some days, the pain doesn't disappear, but it changes, becomes something you can carry rather than something that crushes you. Inside, the music shifted again, this time to a more lively tune. The sound of laughter filtered out to the veranda. Life continues, Grace said softly, whether we choose to participate or not. Samuel nodded, understanding the truth in her words, even if he wasn't ready to embrace it. I should let you return to the party. I've monopolized enough of your time. Actually, I think I'll stay out here a bit longer, she replied. The air is pleasant, and the company isn't objectionable. Despite everything, Samuel found himself smiling. High praise indeed, Miss Harrington. They stood together in companionable silence, watching as a stagecoach rumbled into town, late but intact. The driver waved cheerily to them as he guided his team toward the livery stable. Silver Creek seems like a good place, Grace observed. The kind of town where people look out for each other. It is, Samuel agreed. Elizabeth and I chose it for that reason. We'd planned to raise our children here. The admission hurt less than he expected. Perhaps it was the darkness, or the unexpected ease of speaking with this woman who understood loss firsthand. And now? Grace asked gently. Samuel shrugged. Now I have my ranch, 30 head of cattle. Enough work to fill the days. And the nights. The directness of her question startled him, but he appreciated her honesty. The nights are harder, he admitted, but they pass same as everything else. From inside came the sound of the mayor's voice, making an announcement that was met with applause. The music paused briefly, then resumed with a different tune, slower, more deliberate. The anniversary waltz, Samuel murmured. They play it every year. Grace listened to the melody for a moment. It's beautiful. It was Elizabeth's favorite, he said, the memory washing over him. Last time I heard it was at the harvest dance, 2 months before she fell ill. Grace turned to face him fully. Her expression was gentle but determined. Mr. Hayes, Samuel, would you dance with me? He stared at her, certain he'd misheard. I told you, I know what you told me, she interrupted softly. And I'm not asking you to forget Elizabeth. I'm asking you to remember her, with me, in a way that honors what she loved. Samuel felt his chest tighten. I can't. You can, Grace insisted, holding out her hand. One dance under the stars, away from prying eyes. Not to replace what was, but to acknowledge that beauty still exists in the world. Her hand remained extended between them, an invitation without pressure. Samuel looked at it, then back at her face, earnest, understanding, and somehow both vulnerable and strong in the same moment. Just one dance, she repeated. Then I promise to leave you to your solitude, if that's still what you want. Something shifted within Samuel, not a dramatic change, but a slight giving way, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Before he could reconsider, he took her hand. Grace's smile was worth the discomfort of his racing heart. She stepped closer, placing her other hand lightly on his shoulder. Samuel hesitantly rested his hand at her waist, the position once so familiar now foreign to his touch. They began to move, awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm on the wooden planks of the veranda. The music filtered through the open doors, guiding their steps as they turned slowly under the Wyoming sky. "I'm out of practice," Samuel apologized as he nearly stepped on her foot. "You're doing fine," Grace assured him. "Better than my last dance partner, who spent the entire time looking over my shoulder at another woman." "Sounds like a fool." "Oh, he was," she agreed with a laugh. "But his foolishness is my good fortune tonight." As they continued to dance, Samuel found the movements returning to him, muscle memory awakening after a long dormancy. They moved more fluidly together, turning in slow circles that gradually widened to span the veranda. "Elizabeth would have liked you," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the thought. Grace's eyes softened. "I wish I could have known her. She would have interrogated you about Boston. She always wanted to visit the East Coast. And I would have told her about the libraries and museums, the harbor at sunset, and the bookshops tucked away on side streets." Samuel could almost see it, Elizabeth and Grace walking together, talking animatedly about books and ideas. The image brought pain but also a strange comfort. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For this. For understanding. For not treating me like I'm made of glass." Grace's eyes met his, steady and clear. "We're not made of glass, Samuel. We're made of sterner stuff. We break, yes, but we can mend." The music began to fade, signaling the end of the waltz. They slowed their movements but didn't immediately separate. For a moment, they stood together, hands still joined, something unspoken passing between them. Finally, Grace stepped back, releasing his hand. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Hayes." "Samuel," he corrected gently. "After sharing confidences and a dance, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Samuel," she agreed with a small smile. "And I'm Grace." The sounds of the party continued inside, but neither made a move to return. Instead, they settled onto a bench at the edge of the veranda, looking out over the quiet town. "Will you tell me about your ranch?" Grace asked. So he did. Samuel described the modest house he'd built with his own hands, the creek that ran through the northern pasture, the view of the mountains at sunrise. He told her about his cattle and his 2 faithful horses, about his struggles and small triumphs in the difficult business of ranching. In turn, Grace spoke of Boston, of her teaching experiences, and of her hopes for her new position in Silver Creek. She described the journey west, the changing landscapes, the interesting characters on the stagecoach, the moment she first glimpsed the vast openness of the Wyoming territory. "It felt like I could breathe again," she said, "after months of feeling smothered by memories and expectations." "The open country has that effect," Samuel agreed. "It puts things in perspective." Their conversation flowed easily, interrupted occasionally by partygoers stepping out for air or a quiet word. Each time, Samuel expected Grace to excuse herself, to return to the festivities and the people eager to meet their new schoolteacher. But she remained beside him, seemingly content with their quiet corner of the celebration. As the night deepened, the music from inside grew more boisterous, a sign that the more reserved citizens had departed, leaving the hardier revelers to continue the celebration. "I should probably find lodging for the night," Grace said, stifling a yawn. "The mayor mentioned rooms were available here at the hotel." "They're likely full with visitors for the celebration," Samuel replied. But Martha Wilson keeps a clean boarding house for respectable women. It's where the previous teacher stayed until the schoolhouse quarters were renovated. Are they habitable now? Samuel shook his head. Last I heard, they still needed work. The roof leaked something terrible this spring. Grace sighed. Well, I suppose I'll try the hotel first, then Mrs. Wilson's if necessary. I could escort you, Samuel offered, then hastily added, for propriety's sake. A woman alone at this hour might attract unwanted attention. Thank you, Grace accepted with a grateful smile. I would appreciate that. They rose from the bench, and Samuel was suddenly aware of how long they'd been talking. The moon had risen high overhead, casting silver light across the town. Shall we brave the crowd inside to make our farewells? Grace asked, gesturing toward the ballroom. Samuel hesitated, then shook his head. There's a side entrance. If you don't mind, I'd prefer to avoid. Of course, she interrupted smoothly. Lead the way. They descended the veranda steps and walked around the building, the sounds of the party fading behind them. The side entrance led to a quiet hallway that connected to the hotel's main lobby. The night clerk looked up from his ledger as they entered. Evening, Mr. Hayes. Mississippi. Good evening, Grace replied. I was hoping to secure a room for the night, and potentially longer until more permanent arrangements can be made. The clerk's expression turned apologetic. I'm afraid we're completely full. Mississippi anniversary celebration has brought folks from all over the county. I see, Grace said, disappointment evident in her voice. Perhaps you could direct me to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Then, Martha's full up too, the clerk informed her. Got her sister's family visiting from Cheyenne, plus 2 ladies from the Aid Society in Laramie. Samuel frowned. There must be somewhere suitable for Miss Harrington to stay. The clerk shrugged. Town's bursting at the seams tonight, Mr. Hayes. Even the rooms above the saloon are taken, though I wouldn't suggest those for a lady in any case. Grace's composure remained intact, but Samuel could see the worry in her eyes. Perhaps the mayor has made arrangements I'm unaware of, she suggested. Mayor Thornton and his wife left an hour ago, the clerk replied. Had to get home to relieve their daughter's nurse. Samuel considered the situation. The proper thing would be to find a respectable family willing to accommodate Grace for the night. But at this late hour, with most citizens either at the celebration or already abed, options were limited. Miss Harrington, he said carefully, I have a proposal that may sound improper, but I assure you my intentions are honorable. Grace regarded him warily. Go on. I have a small cabin on my property separate from the main house. It was built for ranch hands, though I haven't employed any recently. It's clean and secure with its own stove and pump. You would have complete privacy, and I would remain in the main house. The clerk raised his eyebrows but said nothing. Grace considered the offer. It's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Samuel assured her. The cabin sits empty, and it's a shame not to use it. Once things settle after the celebration, we can make more appropriate arrangements. Grace glanced at the clerk, who shrugged again. Town's full, Mississippi. Mr. Hayes is a respected rancher hereabouts. No one would think ill of such an arrangement, given the circumstances. After a moment's hesitation, Grace nodded. Very well. I accept your kind offer, Samuel. Thank you. Relief washed over him. The thought of this woman, who had coaxed him into his first dance in 2 years, having nowhere to lay her head, was unacceptable. My wagon is at the livery, he said. If you'll gather your belongings, I'll fetch it and meet you back here. Grace agreed, and they parted ways temporarily, she to collect her trunk from where it had been stored upon her arrival, he to retrieve his team and wagon from the stable. As Samuel harnessed his horses, He reflected on the unexpected turn the evening had taken. What had begun as an obligation, a reluctant appearance at a social function, had somehow resulted in him offering shelter to a woman he'd just met. Yet it didn't feel strange or impulsive. Something about Grace Harrington inspired trust. By the time he pulled the wagon around to the hotel entrance, Grace was waiting with a modest trunk and a smaller carpet bag. The celebration continued inside, but the main street was relatively quiet, with only the occasional reveler stumbling home under the watchful eye of Deputy Collins, who tipped his hat as they passed. "It's about 3 miles to my ranch," Samuel explained as he helped Grace into the wagon. "Not a long journey, but the road gets rough in places. After 2 weeks on a stagecoach, I doubt your wagon can offer any discomfort I haven't already endured," Grace replied with good humor. As they traveled, the sounds of the town gave way to the quieter music of the countryside crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. The moon illuminated the landscape, revealing rolling hills that rose gradually toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Grace murmured, gazing out at the scenery. "So different from the east." "It grows on you," Samuel agreed. "I came out here thinking I'd stay a year or two, make some money, and head back to Illinois. That was 12 years ago. What made you stay?" Samuel guided the wagon around a bend in the road. "At first, it was the challenge. This land doesn't give up its bounty easily, you have to earn it. Then I met Elizabeth, and, well, this became home." Grace nodded understanding. "Home isn't always where we expect to find it." They continued in companionable silence until Samuel guided the horses off the main road onto a narrower track that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. As they emerged from the trees, the full extent of the Hayes Ranch came into view under the moonlight. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a solidly built structure of logs and stone with a wide porch across the front. Nearby stood a barn, corral, and several smaller outbuildings. The cabin Samuel had mentioned was visible about 100 yards from the main house, nestled against a rocky outcropping that would shield it from the worst of the winter winds. "This is lovely," Grace said as Samuel brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "You've built something remarkable here." "It's still a work in progress," he replied, setting the brake and jumping down. He came around to help her descend, offering his hand for support. The brief touch of her fingers against his palm sent an unexpected warmth through Samuel's chest, a sensation so unfamiliar that he nearly withdrew his hand in surprise. Instead, he steadied her as she stepped down, then busied himself with unloading her trunk. The cabin was indeed small but well maintained. It consisted of a single room with a cast-iron stove, a narrow bed with fresh linens, a table with 2 chairs, and a washstand with basin and pitcher. A lantern hung from a hook near the door, which Samuel lit to dispel the darkness. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it's clean and dry." "It's perfect," Grace assured him, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table. "Far better than I expected for my first night in Silver Creek." Samuel carried in her trunk and set it at the foot of the bed. "There's firewood stacked outside, and the pump works well. The water's sweet here. If you need anything, the main house is just up the way." Grace nodded, suddenly looking tired after the long day. "Thank you, Samuel. Truly." "It's nothing," he said, backing toward the door. "Get some rest. We can discuss your more permanent arrangements in the morning." "Samuel," Grace called as he reached for the door handle. When he turned back, she was standing in the center of the cabin, the lantern light casting a warm glow over her features. "Thank you for the dance." The simple statement carried more weight than its words alone suggested. Samuel nodded, understanding what she meant. "Thank you for asking me." With that, he stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. As he walked to the main house, he found himself unexpectedly lighter, as if something long constricted within him had begun to loosen its grip. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the summer sun rising early over the eastern hills. Samuel had been awake for hours, tending to his usual chores with a strange energy he hadn't felt in months. He had just finished saddling his horse to check on the cattle in the north pasture when he spotted Grace emerging from the cabin. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon, and carried a small basket. She waved when she saw him, changing direction to approach the corral. "Good morning," she called. "I hope I'm not disturbing your work." "Not at all," Samuel replied, securing the saddle. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Grace admitted. "There's something about the air here so clean and clear. I feel quite refreshed." The altitude takes some getting used to, but most find it agreeable once they adjust. Grace nodded, then held up her basket. "I took the liberty of gathering some eggs from your henhouse. I thought perhaps I might prepare breakfast as a small token of appreciation for your hospitality." Samuel hesitated. It had been a long time since he'd shared a meal with anyone, let alone a woman in his home. His usual breakfast was a hasty affair of coffee and whatever was left from the previous evening's supper. Seeing his hesitation, Grace quickly added, "Unless you've already eaten, of course." "No," Samuel found himself saying. "That would be nice. Thank you." He tied his horse back to the hitching post and led Grace to the main house. As they approached, he became acutely aware of how sparse his living arrangements had become. While the exterior of the house was well maintained out of practical necessity, the interior had suffered from his neglect. "I should warn you," he said as they reached the porch. "I haven't had visitors in some time." Grace smiled reassuringly. "I'm not here to judge your housekeeping, Samuel." Nevertheless, as he pushed open the door, Samuel found himself seeing his home through fresh eyes. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A wooden table with 4 chairs stood near the kitchen area, while a worn leather armchair faced the hearth. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that had been Elizabeth's pride and joy. The room was tidy enough. Samuel wasn't one for disorder, but it lacked the feminine touches that had once made it a home. No curtains hung at the windows, no rugs softened the wooden floors, no flowers brightened the table. If Grace noticed these absences, she gave no indication. Instead, she moved naturally to the kitchen area, setting her basket on the work table. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the stove. "Please," Samuel nodded. "I'll get a fire going." They worked together with surprising ease, Samuel building a fire in the stove while Grace located a skillet and mixing bowl. She found coffee in a canister and set water to boil, then began cracking eggs into the bowl. "I hope you don't mind a simple breakfast," she said as she added a splash of milk from the jug Samuel had retrieved from the springhouse that morning. "I'm not particular," he assured her. "Anything's better than my own cooking." Grace laughed, the sound filling the kitchen and making the house feel more alive than it had in years. "I find that most bachelors say that, regardless of their actual culinary skills. In my case, it's the honest truth. Elizabeth tried to teach me, but I never had the knack for it." At the mention of his wife, Samuel braced for the familiar pang of grief. It came, but softer than before, tempered by the companionable presence beside him. "My mother always said cooking is just following directions," Grace remarked as she whisked the eggs, though she was known to improvise liberally, despite her own advice. "Is your mother still in Boston?" Samuel asked, realizing he knew little about Grace's family. "No, my parents passed several years ago. It was just my brother and me, and he moved to California during the gold rush. We correspond, but I haven't seen him in 8 years." "So you're alone too," Samuel observed softly. Grace's hands stilled momentarily. Yes, I suppose I am, though I've never thought of it quite that way. Alone sounds more solitary than I feel. Independent might be a better word. Samuel considered this as he set plates and cups on the table. Independent, then. It suits you. She smiled at that, pouring the egg mixture into the heated skillet. What about you? Do you have family elsewhere? A brother in St. Louis. 2 sisters, both married with children, back in Illinois. Samuel hadn't seen any of them since Elizabeth's funeral, when they'd come west briefly to support him. We write occasionally. Family is complicated, Grace observed, expertly flipping the eggs as they cooked. Even when we love them dearly. Indeed. Soon, the simple meal was ready: fluffy scrambled eggs, slices of bread toasted in the skillet and spread with butter and honey, and strong black coffee. They sat across from each other at the table, the domesticity of the scene both foreign and strangely comforting to Samuel. This is delicious, he said after his first bite. Thank you. It's the least I could do, Grace replied. Besides, cooking for 2 is always more satisfying than cooking for oneself. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows and casting warm patterns across the table. I should speak with Mayor Thornton today about more permanent lodging, Grace said eventually. I don't want to impose on your generosity any longer than necessary. Samuel found himself unexpectedly reluctant at the thought of her leaving. There's no rush. The cabin is yours for as long as you need it. That's very kind, but I should establish myself properly in town before school begins next month. The children and their parents will be curious enough about their new teacher without adding rumors about where I'm staying. She was right, of course. Silver Creek was a decent town, but gossip traveled faster than the stagecoach. A single woman living on a widower's property, regardless of the circumstances or separate dwellings, would eventually raise eyebrows. Of course, Samuel agreed. I can take you into town later today, if you'd like. Thank you, that would be helpful. Grace took a sip of her coffee. Though I admit, I'm in no hurry to leave this peaceful place. Your ranch is quite beautiful in the morning light. You should see it at sunset, Samuel said without thinking. The mountains turn golden, then purple as the light fades. Elizabeth used to say it was like watching the earth itself go to sleep. Instead of the awkward pause he expected, Grace's expression softened with genuine interest. It sounds lovely. Perhaps I might see it before I leave. I'd like that, Samuel found himself saying, and realized with surprise that he meant it. After breakfast, Grace insisted on washing the dishes while Samuel tended to his delayed morning chores. By the time he returned from checking the nearby pastures, she had not only cleaned the kitchen but swept the main room and was examining the bookshelves with evident delight. Your collection is impressive, she said as he entered. I see volumes here that would be the envy of many Boston drawing rooms. They were Elizabeth's, Samuel explained, removing his hat. She ordered them from catalogs and had them shipped out at great expense. Said a life without books wasn't worth living. A woman after my own heart, Grace replied, carefully replacing a volume of Tennyson's poetry. As a teacher, I value literacy above almost all other skills. It opens doors that might otherwise remain forever closed. Is that why you became a teacher? Grace considered the question. Partly. I've always loved learning, and sharing knowledge seems the natural extension of that love. But there's also something profound about watching a child grasp a new concept, seeing that moment of understanding dawn in their eyes. Her face glowed with genuine passion as she spoke, and Samuel found himself captivated by her animation. This was a woman who had found her purpose, despite the losses she had endured. The children of Silver Creek are fortunate to have you, he said sincerely. A blush colored Grace's cheeks at the compliment. Well, they may not think so when I assign their first essays. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something unnamed. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat. I should prepare the wagon if we're to go into town. Of course, Grace agreed. I'll get my things. The ride to Silver Creek was pleasant, the summer day warm but not oppressive. They spoke easily about the landscape, the history of the area, and Grace's plans for the school term. Samuel found himself sharing memories of the town's development that he hadn't revisited in years: the building of the church, the excitement when the first telegraph lines reached them, the year a traveling Shakespeare company performed in the newly constructed town hall. It sounds like you've been an important part of this community, Grace observed. Samuel shrugged. I've contributed where I could. Every small town depends on its citizens pulling together. Yet you've isolated yourself these past 2 years, she said gently. Your absence has likely been felt. He couldn't deny it. There had been numerous invitations he'd declined, projects he'd avoided, gatherings he'd skipped. It was easier that way, he admitted. Being around others reminded me of what I'd lost. And now, Grace asked, has that changed? Samuel considered the question as they crested the final hill before town. I'm not sure, he answered honestly. But sitting across from you at breakfast this morning, it didn't hurt the way I expected it to. Grace's smile was understanding. Healing isn't linear, Samuel. It comes in fits and starts, in unexpected moments and quiet revelations. You sound like you speak from experience. I do, she confirmed. After Charles died, I tried to force myself back into normal life too quickly. I attended parties, joined committees, taught my classes with determined cheer. But inside, I was still bleeding. It wasn't until I allowed myself to acknowledge the pain that I could begin to move through it. Her candor touched something deep within Samuel. How did you know when it was time to move forward? I didn't, not with certainty, Grace replied thoughtfully. But one day, I realized I had laughed at a student's joke without immediately feeling guilty for experiencing joy. It was a small moment but significant. After that, I began to notice others: a sunset that moved me to tears, a book that captivated me for hours, a conversation that left me energized rather than drained. They were approaching the outskirts of town now, passing the small farms that surrounded Silver Creek proper. And coming west? Samuel asked. Was that part of your healing? It was a leap of faith, Grace admitted. A belief that somewhere, a new chapter was waiting to be written. Her words lingered in Samuel's mind as they drove down the main street. Silver Creek was considerably calmer than the previous night, though evidence of the celebration remained in the faded bunting that still decorated some storefronts. Their first stop was the mayor's office, where they found Mayor Thornton nursing a cup of coffee and looking somewhat worse for wear after the previous night's festivities. Miss Harrington, Mr. Hayes, he exclaimed, rising from his desk with evident effort. What a pleasant surprise to see you both. After explaining the lodging situation, Grace inquired about the timeline for the schoolhouse repairs. The roof's nearly finished, Mayor Thornton assured her. But the living quarters need another week or two of work. The spring flooding was worse than expected. I see, Grace replied, maintaining her composure despite the obvious inconvenience. And is there suitable temporary accommodation available in town? The mayor tugged at his collar uncomfortably. Well, that's the thing. With harvest approaching and several families visiting from surrounding areas, lodging is scarce. Mrs. Wilson's boarding house is full through the end of the month, and the hotel has several rooms under renovation after incident involving the Hargrove brothers and too much whiskey. Samuel frowned. Surely there must be someone with a spare room. The Petersons have offered, Mayor Thornton said, but they have 4 children under the age of 6. Not the most restful environment, I'm afraid. Grace's expression remained calm, but Samuel could see the concern in her eyes. Coming to a sudden decision, he spoke up. Miss Harrington is welcome to continue using the cabin on my property until the schoolhouse is ready. Both Grace and the mayor looked at him in surprise. That's very generous, Samuel, Mayor Thornton said. But we wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Samuel insisted. The cabin sits empty otherwise, and it's comfortable enough. Miss Harrington has already spent one night there without incident. The mayor's eyebrows rose slightly at this information, but he recovered quickly. Well, if you're both amenable to the arrangement, it would certainly solve our immediate problem. Grace hesitated. I wouldn't want to cause any misunderstanding. Understanding her concern, Samuel addressed it directly. The cabin is entirely separate from my house, with its own entrance and amenities. For additional propriety, perhaps Mrs. Thornton or another respectable lady from town might visit to assure everyone of the appropriateness of the arrangement. Mayor Thornton nodded approvingly. A sensible suggestion. I'm sure Marjorie would be happy to inspect the accommodations and put any potential gossip to rest. After a moment's consideration, Grace agreed. Very well. Thank you, Samuel, for your continued hospitality. With the matter settled, they proceeded to the general store, where Grace needed to purchase a few necessities. As Samuel waited near the entrance, Sheriff Miller approached, clapping him on the shoulder. Hayes, twice in public in as many days must be some kind of record. The sheriff joked good-naturedly. Samuel managed a small smile. Don't get used to it, Joe. Sheriff Miller's expression grew more serious. Good to see you engaging again, Sam. Town hasn't been the same without your involvement. Before Samuel could respond, the sheriff's attention shifted to Grace, who was discussing fabric options with Mrs. Jenkins, the shopkeeper's wife. New schoolteacher seems nice, he observed. Educated, from what I hear. Pretty too. She's intelligent and capable, Samuel agreed, uncomfortable with the sheriff's speculative tone. The children will benefit from her experience. Sheriff Miller gave him a knowing look. Word is she spent the night at your place. Samuel stiffened. News travels fast. Small town, the sheriff shrugged. Tommy at the livery mentioned you came for your wagon late last night and left with a lady. People talk. It was a matter of necessity, Samuel explained evenly. The town was full, and I had an empty cabin. Nothing more. If you say so, Sheriff Miller replied, though his expression remained dubious. Just be careful, Sam. 2 years is a long time to be alone, and a pretty face can be mighty persuasive. Samuel's jaw tightened. Miss Harrington is a respectable woman who found herself in difficult circumstances. I offered assistance as any gentleman would. I'd appreciate if you'd make that clear to anyone who suggests otherwise. Recognizing the warning in Samuel's tone, the sheriff raised his hands in surrender. No offense meant. For what it's worth, I think she seems like a fine woman. After the sheriff departed, Samuel remained troubled by the exchange. He had known there would be talk, but hadn't anticipated how quickly it would start or how protective he would feel of Grace's reputation. When she finished her purchases, they loaded her parcels into the wagon and continued to the schoolhouse. Despite the mayor's assurances about progress, it was clear that significant work remained. The roof was indeed nearly complete, but the attached living quarters had exposed beams and missing floorboards. Well, Grace said with forced optimism as they surveyed the space, it has potential. Samuel examined the structure with a critical eye. The workmanship is solid, but they're moving slowly. I could lend a hand, get things finished faster. Grace looked at him in surprise. You would do that? I'm handy with tools, he said simply. And the sooner this is habitable, the sooner you can establish yourself properly in town. Though his offer was practical, Samuel realized with some confusion that he wasn't eager for Grace to leave his ranch. Her presence, even in the separate cabin, had already brought a vitality to the place that had been missing for too long. "Thank you," Grace said softly. "That's very kind." They spent another hour in town, with Grace introducing herself to various citizens and Samuel reluctantly drawn into conversations he would normally have avoided. To his surprise, these interactions weren't as painful as he had anticipated. The sympathy in people's eyes had largely been replaced by genuine pleasure at seeing him. By mid-afternoon, they were heading back to the ranch, the wagon loaded with Grace's purchases and some supplies Samuel had needed. The sun was high, the day warm but pleasant. "People seemed glad to see you," Grace observed as they left the town behind. "Sheriff Miller mentioned you were once quite involved in community affairs." Samuel nodded. "I served on the town council for a time, helped organize the Harvest Festival each year. Elizabeth and I both believed in contributing to the common good." "Those sound like values worth holding on to," Grace said gently. He glanced at her, struck again by her ability to challenge without pushing. "Perhaps they are." As they approached the ranch, Samuel made a spontaneous decision. Instead of taking the main track to the house, he guided the wagon onto a narrower path that wound up into the hills. "Where are we going?" Grace asked, curious rather than alarmed. "You mentioned wanting to see the sunset from the ranch," Samuel explained. "There's a better vantage point than the house." The path climbed steadily, skirting stands of pine and aspen until it opened onto a small plateau. Samuel brought the wagon to a halt and set the brake. "We're a bit early for sunset," he said, "but the view is worth it at any hour." Helping Grace down from the wagon, he led her to the edge of the plateau. Below them spread the entire valley, his ranch with its buildings and pastures, the winding creek that gave the town its name, and Silver Creek itself nestled against the distant hills. "It's magnificent," Grace breathed, taking in the panorama. "Like something from a painting." "Elizabeth and I discovered this spot our first month here," Samuel said, the memory washing over him with unexpected warmth rather than pain. "We'd ride up in the evenings during summer, sometimes bringing a picnic dinner." Grace smiled at the image. "What a lovely tradition." "It was," he agreed, surprised by how natural it felt to share these memories with her. "We talked about building a small cabin up here someday, but never got around to it." The wind picked up, causing Grace to shiver slightly despite the warmth of the day. Without thinking, Samuel removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, pulling it closer around herself. Their eyes met briefly, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of connection that transcended their short acquaintance. Samuel cleared his throat and turned back to the view. "We have a few hours until sunset. Would you like to head back to the ranch, or stay a while?" "Stay," Grace said without hesitation. "If you don't mind. It's so peaceful here." They settled on a fallen log, comfortable in each other's company, as they watched clouds cast moving shadows across the valley below. Grace asked questions about the ranch, its history, its challenges, its rhythms, and Samuel found himself sharing details he hadn't spoken of in years. "You love this land?" Grace observed after he described the spring calving season with unexpected enthusiasm. "I do," Samuel admitted. "Even at its most difficult, there's something honest about ranching. The work is hard but straightforward. The rewards are tangible." "Is that why you've stayed, even after Elizabeth's passing?" "Your connection to the land." Samuel considered the question carefully. "Partly, but also because leaving felt like abandoning what we built together. As if I'd be leaving her behind completely." Grace nodded, understanding. "The places we've loved with those we've lost become sacred in a way. I still can't bring myself to visit certain parts of Boston that Charles and I frequented." Does it get easier? Samuel asked, the question simpler than it might have been even a day earlier. Yes, Grace said softly. Not by forgetting, but by allowing the memories to transform from wounds into treasures. They talked until the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. As the light changed, so did the landscape, the greens deepening, the shadows lengthening, the distant peaks taking on the golden hue Samuel had described. You were right, Grace murmured as the sun dipped lower. It's like watching the earth go to sleep. The simple echo of Elizabeth's words might once have been painful, but now they felt like a bridge between past and present, a continuity Samuel hadn't thought possible. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, they reluctantly returned to the wagon. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts yet comfortable in the shared silence. When they reached the main house, Samuel helped Grace down from the wagon. I'll bring your purchases to the cabin, he offered. Thank you, she replied, but made no move to leave. Instead, she stood looking up at him in the gathering darkness, her expression thoughtful. Samuel, I want to thank you not just for the lodging or the sunset, but for sharing your memories. I know it can't be easy. It's been easier than I expected, he admitted. Talking with you feels natural. Grace smiled, the moonlight illuminating her face. I feel the same way. It's a rare gift to meet someone who understands loss without being defined by it. On impulse, Samuel reached out and took her hand. The simple contact sent a current of warmth through him, not the passionate heat of youthful attraction, but something deeper and more substantial. Will you join me for breakfast again tomorrow? He asked, surprising himself with the invitation. I'd like that very much, Grace replied, gently squeezing his hand before releasing it. As Samuel watched her walk toward the cabin, he felt something unfurling within him, a cautious hope he had thought permanently extinguished. The future that had seemed so bleak and solitary just days ago now held possibilities he hadn't dared imagine. In the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged. Grace and Samuel shared breakfast each morning before he tended to his ranch duties, and she prepared lessons for the upcoming school term. In the afternoons, Samuel often drove them into town, where he had begun working on the schoolhouse repairs with surprising dedication. Evenings frequently found them on the main house porch, reading aloud from Elizabeth's book collection or simply talking as the stars appeared overhead. The arrangement that had begun as temporary necessity gradually transformed into something neither had anticipated, a partnership of minds and spirits that deepened with each passing day. True to his word, Mayor Thornton had sent his wife to inspect the cabin, and Mrs. Thornton had pronounced it entirely proper. Still, gossip circulated in Silver Creek, though most of it was good-natured speculation rather than malicious rumor. The townsfolk had noticed the change in Samuel, how he participated in conversations again, offered assistance with community matters, even attended Sunday services for the first time in nearly 2 years. You've brought him back to life, Mrs. Wilson confided to Grace after church one Sunday. We'd all but given up hope of seeing the old Samuel again. Grace had demurred, uncomfortable with the implication that she alone was responsible for Samuel's gradual reemergence into community life. Mr. Hayes is finding his own way forward, she had replied. I'm merely fortunate to witness the journey. But privately, Grace acknowledged that something profound was developing between them, a connection neither had sought, but both increasingly cherished. One evening in late August, as the schoolhouse neared completion, Samuel returned from town with unexpected news. There's to be a harvest dance next Saturday, he announced as they sat on the porch after supper. First one I've heard of since. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Grace understood immediately. The first since Elizabeth passed. Samuel nodded, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Mayor Thornton asked if we would attend. Said it would be a good opportunity to introduce you properly to the families whose children you'll be teaching. That sounds sensible, Grace agreed, studying his profile. How do you feel about it? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Nervous, he finally admitted. The last harvest dance was where Elizabeth and I danced for the final time. But also ready, I think, at least to try. Grace reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. The gesture had become natural between them, a simple comfort that required no explanation. We'll go together, she said softly, and stay only as long as you wish. The night of the harvest dance arrived, warm for September but with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. The town hall had been transformed with bunting, lanterns, and displays of the season's bounty, sheaves of wheat, corn husks, and pumpkins arranged artfully around the room. Grace wore a deep burgundy dress she had purchased in town, her auburn hair arranged in an elegant style that framed her face. When Samuel saw her emerge from the cabin, he stood speechless on the porch of the main house, hat in hand. You look beautiful, he finally managed, offering his arm to escort her to the waiting wagon. And you are quite handsome, she replied, taking in his dark suit and crisp white shirt. Silver Creek's most eligible rancher will cause quite a stir tonight. Samuel's laugh came easily now, no longer the rusty sound of those first days. I think you'll find I only have eyes for one lady this evening. The admission hung between them, neither quite ready to address its implications but both acknowledging its truth. The town hall was already bustling when they arrived. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small band of local musicians tuned their instruments on a raised platform. Families greeted Grace warmly, introducing children who regarded their new teacher with mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Samuel stayed close by her side, his presence both protective and proud. Several times, Grace caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart quicken, a look of admiration tinged with something deeper. When the music began, couples moved onto the floor for the first dance. Samuel and Grace remained seated, conversing with Doc Peterson and his wife about the upcoming winter, which everyone agreed would likely be harsh based on the thickness of the squirrel's fur and the early migration of certain birds. As the evening progressed, several men approached Grace asking for a dance. She accepted a few offers, aware that as the new schoolteacher, building relationships with the community was important. Samuel watched from the sidelines, no longer devastated by the music, but not yet ready to join the dancing himself. After returning from a turn around the floor with the blacksmith's eldest son, a young man preparing for college in Denver, Grace found Samuel standing near an open window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Catching your breath?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Just thinking," he replied, his expression contemplative. "About Elizabeth?" "Yes," he admitted, "but not in the way you might expect. I was thinking she would have liked you not just as I said before, but truly liked you. Your spirit, your mind, your kindness." Grace was touched by his words. "I believe I would have liked her too." The band began a new song, a familiar waltz that caused Samuel to stiffen slightly. "The anniversary waltz," he murmured. "They play it every year." Grace remembered their conversation on the night they met, how this had been Elizabeth's favorite, how they had danced to it at the harvest festival before her illness. "Samuel," she said softly, "would you dance with me?" He turned to look at her, surprise and uncertainty in his eyes. "Here? In front of everyone?" "Yes," she answered simply. "If you're ready." Samuel looked out at the dance floor, then back at Grace. The moments stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "I'd be honored, Miss Harrington." Grace's heart soared as she placed her hand in his. Together, they moved to the edge of the dance floor, where Samuel hesitated one final time. "The last time I danced to this song was with Elizabeth," he said quietly. "It feels important that you know that." "I do know," Grace assured him, "and I think she would be glad to see you dancing again." Samuel took a deep breath, then led Grace onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist, hers on his shoulder, their other hands clasped together. For a moment, they stood still as the music flowed around them. Then, with a courage born of months of healing and the strength of their growing bond, Samuel took the first step. They moved together with surprising grace, finding their rhythm as naturally as they had that night on the veranda. Around them, other couples danced, but many eyes were drawn to the widower and the schoolteacher, recognizing the significance of the moment. "Everyone's watching," Samuel murmured, a hint of discomfort in his voice. "Let them," Grace replied. "They're witnessing a man of courage and heart." As they turned across the floor, Samuel's movements became more confident, his body remembering steps long dormant. The tension in his shoulders eased, and a genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and illuminated his features. "I'd forgotten," he said wonderingly. "Forgotten what?" "How it feels to be truly alive." The simple statement brought tears to Grace's eyes. In that moment, as the music swelled around them, something shifted and settled between them, an understanding that transcended words. When the waltz ended, they remained on the floor, hands still joined, eyes locked in silent communication. The room around them faded as Samuel gently raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in a gesture both traditional and deeply personal. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The harvest dance continued late into the night, but Samuel and Grace stayed only for a few more dances before bidding farewell to their neighbors and friends. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in thought but comfortable in the shared silence. As they approached the main house, Samuel brought the wagon to a stop. The moon was full, bathing the landscape in silver light and casting long shadows across the yard. "The schoolhouse will be finished this week," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of emotion. "You'll be able to move in before classes begin." "Yes," Grace agreed, her heart suddenly heavy at the thought. "I should begin packing my things." Samuel turned to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. "Or you could stay." Grace's breath caught. "Samuel?" He took her hands in his touch warm and sure. "These past weeks with you have shown me that life continues, just as you said that first night. But more than that, they've shown me that life can be beautiful again, in new and unexpected ways." "Samuel, what are you saying?" Grace asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "I'm saying that I care for you, Grace Harrington, deeply and completely. I'm saying that the thought of you leaving this ranch, even to move just a few miles away, feels unbearable." He paused, gathering his courage. "I'm asking if you might consider making this your home, not in the cabin, but in the main house. With me." Grace felt tears welling in her eyes. "Are you certain? I would never want to replace Elizabeth or diminish what you shared." "Elizabeth will always be part of me," Samuel said gently, "just as Charles will always be part of you. But I've learned that the heart has a remarkable capacity to expand. Loving you doesn't diminish my past, it honors it by proving that the capacity for joy she helped nurture in me still exists." Grace reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with tender fingers. "I love you, Samuel Hayes, in a way I never expected to love again." Samuel's smile was radiant as he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Under the vast Wyoming sky, their lips met in a kiss that spoke of endings and beginnings, of grief transcended and hope renewed. As they held each other close, the ranch around them no longer felt like a memorial to what had been lost, but a foundation for what was yet to come. The following spring, Samuel and Grace were married in a simple ceremony in the meadow near the plateau where they had watched their first sunset together. The entire town turned out to celebrate as the once reclusive rancher and the schoolteacher from Boston exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers. At the reception held in the town hall, when the band played the anniversary waltz, Samuel took his new wife's hand without hesitation, leading her onto the dance floor with confident steps and a heart full of gratitude. As they danced, Grace leaned close to whisper in his ear, "Thank you for letting me lead you to the floor that first night." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "And thank you for teaching me that even after great loss, life offers second chances to those brave enough to take them." Together they turned beneath the rafters where paper lanterns swayed, their steps in perfect harmony, two souls who had found in each other not replacements for what they had lost, but companions for the journey ahead, their shared dance only just beginning.